Before kingdoms or chronicles, suffering left its story in bone. It echoed through wounds that healed wrong, fractures that never mended, and lives cut short without a name. Some died as punishment, some in panic and water, some in rituals we no longer understand, and some simply endured a world that offered them little mercy. Across thousands of years, their bodies carried the cost, yet their faces still ask the same question. What does it mean to be human when survival becomes sacrifice? This is Riddle Me This Mysteries, and this is episode 6, Faces of Victims and Sacrifice. He was laid to rest as if nothing were unusual, a young man on a wooden bier, buried among dozens of others in a quiet Roman settlement. But one detail refused to disappear with time. A single iron nail driven straight through his heel bone, the only confirmed evidence of crucifixion ever found in Roman Britain. Excavated at Fenstanton in Cambridgeshire, his grave dates between 130 and 360 CE, a period when the empire's laws and punishments reached even its farthest provinces. He was between 25 and 35, lightly built, with joints worn down by constant labor. His teeth carried the marks of chronic disease. The bones of his lower legs were thinned and inflamed, a sign he may have spent part of his life bound or shackled. Even in death, 12 nails from the wooden board beneath him remained scattered around the skeleton, a quiet imprint of the last place he rested. Forensic artists rebuilt his face from the skull. Brown hair, brown eyes, a narrow jaw, and the lean structure of a man who rarely had enough to eat. There is no hint of rebellion or crime here, only the life of someone whose suffering was never meant to be remembered, recorded, or retold. Yet his bones did not stay silent. They speak for thousands who died the same way, without graves, names, or faces. His story ends on land, but our next begins beneath cold, dark water. When the Vasa left Stockholm harbour on a bright August afternoon in 1628, no one expected its maiden voyage to last barely 20 minutes. Among the 30 or so people who never made it back to shore was a young woman whose identity remained hidden for almost 4 centuries. Her skeleton, labelled simply G, was first assumed to be male. The skull was strong, the jaw pronounced, and early researchers imagined a sailor named Gustav. But new DNA analysis corrected the record. She was a woman in her late 20s, fair-skinned with blue eyes and blonde hair, fibers of which were still caught in the red wool hat found beside her. Her spine and shoulders show the strain of repeated heavy lifting, suggesting a life of constant work, perhaps as a servant, helper, or laborer traveling with the ship's crew. Forensic artist Oscar Nilsson rebuilt her face using CT scans of the skull and Scandinavian tissue depth data. The result is striking. A calm, pale face framed by light hair, wearing the same tall red hat found in the wreck. Her expression is neutral, almost reserved, as if quietly aware of the dangers of boarding a warship weighted with 64 cannons and too top-heavy to survive a sudden gust of wind. The Vasa became a symbol of royal ambition and engineering failure, but her presence reminds us that its story was also lived by ordinary people, young, hard-working, and forgotten until science offered them a voice again. From a tragedy in cold northern waters, we move far back into a world of heat and stone, where another young life unfolded 30,000 years earlier. Long before deserts had names, and long before kingdoms carved their stories in stone, a young man was buried at Nazlet Khater in Upper Egypt. He lived nearly 30,000 years ago, in a world ruled by hunger, heat, and the rhythm of chipped stone tools. Yet his grave was careful, deliberate, a sign that even in harsh times, someone chose to lay him to rest with intention. He was between 17 and 29 years old, but his bones carry the burden of a much older life. His spine and joints show the grinding strain of constant labor, the kind that begins in childhood and never lets up. At around 160 centimeters tall, he stood with the compact strength shaped by years of lifting, knapping, and quarrying flint. The workshop found beside him, littered with stone flakes and a polished axe, may have been the center of his short existence. Recent reconstructions reveal a striking mix of traits. The long, narrow skull and broad cheekbones, typical of early Homo sapiens in Africa, paired with a robust jaw that hints at older ancestry. A 2025 study of his ribcage shows a slender, cylindrical chest adapted to the heat of his environment and to the physical demands of unbroken work. Artists rebuilt his face with dark eyes, dark skin, and tightly curled hair, not speculation, but probability drawn from the genetics of the region and the universal patterns of early human life. He lived thousands of years before writing, pottery, or settled villages, yet his burial shows that even then, people mourned, remembered, and cared. His face bridges a vast gap in time, familiar and still marked by the weight of a world that demanded strength long before adulthood. As his grave settles back into the heat of the Pleistocene, another waits in the cold depths of Mesolithic Sweden. 8,000 years ago, at a quiet lake in what is now central Sweden, a young man's skull was placed on the end of a wooden stake. It wasn't a battlefield trophy, and it wasn't carelessly discarded. The people who lived at Kanaljorden arranged their dead with purpose, and his presence there was part of a ritual whose meaning has slipped beyond our reach. Archaeologists found at least 11 individuals at the site, most of them represented only by their crania. 2 still had wooden stakes inserted through the base of the skull, including this man, likely in his 20s or early 30s. His jaw was missing, but the bones that remained tell a complex story. A healed injury above the brow, signs of blows he survived long before he died. He was placed with animal remains, boar, elk, beside a wooden platform built over the shallow water. It was not a place of disposal, it was a place of ceremony. Forensic artist Oscar Nilsson reconstructed his face from a detailed 3D scan. The missing mandible forced careful interpretation, but the rest of the skull offered a clear framework. Wide-set eyes, strong cheekbones, and traces of the healed trauma that marked his earlier life. Genetic data from people of the same time and region suggest dark skin, dark hair, and blue or hazel eyes, a combination common in Mesolithic Scandinavia. The result is a face both familiar and distant, shaped by survival in a landscape where winter, water, and forest defined every choice. Why he was placed on a stake remains an unanswered question. Perhaps he was honored, perhaps displayed, or perhaps his presence marked a social boundary only his people understood. Whatever the reason, his story shows that even the earliest societies carried beliefs as layered and intricate as any that came after. A ritual frozen beneath a northern lake fades, and another life emerges from the margins of the Middle Ages. In a medieval cemetery in Wekno, among nearly 400 ordinary graves, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a man whose body told a very different story from those around him. He lived with 2 rare skeletal conditions, achondroplasia and laryngeal dyschondrosteosis, from the moment he was born. His limbs were short, his proportions unusual, and his movement shaped by bones that never followed the patterns of others. Yet he was buried here, in the same Christian cemetery, with the same rites and the same quiet dignity as everyone else. He was between 30 and 45 years old, an age many in the Middle Ages never reached. His joints, hips, knees, ankles, carried deep grooves of wear, the kind that comes from years of work, not isolation. One arm showed a congenital deformity, but the rest of his skeleton reveals strength and adaptation. There are no signs of neglect or long-term malnutrition. Whatever challenges he faced them as part of a community. Recent 3D modeling allowed researchers to reconstruct his appearance with care. His skull shows the hallmark traits of achondroplasia, a prominent forehead, a shortened midface, and a broad cranial vault. The virtual reconstruction filled in what the bones could not, the posture shaped by his conditions, the balance he adjusted to over decades, and the expression that belongs to no diagnosis at all. Traits like hair and eye color remain unconfirmed, but his face is built from the same soft tissue patterns that shaped medieval lives across the region. His life was marked by difference, but not defined by isolation. He worked, he aged, and he was laid to rest among people who saw him not as an outlier, but as one of their own. His face survives as a final reminder that even in the Middle Ages, humanity often lived quietly between the lines of hardship, in resilience, acceptance, and the simple act of belonging. Across centuries and continents, These 5 faces remind us that history isn't shaped only by rulers or warriors, but by ordinary people whose lives ended in silence. A crucified slave on the edge of empire, a young woman lost to a ship that sank before it ever sailed, a Pleistocene laborer worn down long before adulthood, a man whose skull was lifted into a ritual we can't decode, and another who carried his difference through a world that rarely understood it. Their bodies were the last witnesses to their stories. Their reconstructions return what time tried to erase, not just how they looked, but the human weight behind every mark, fracture, and wound.